Greetings, everybody! Welcome once more to the Dracovin Empire. It is I, of course, your host, your guide, your emperor here, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, ready to take you to Golarion once more. Yes, the world of Pathfinder. If you are ready to go, I can open a portal, a time-space gateway that will take us all the way to Golarion, to a legendary empire, Tar Taargadth, the Empire of the Dwarves, which we're going to be learning about today. But if you are ready to go, I will need a little bit of a tip before we go, and you take my hand. Remember to subscribe if you already aren't. Helps out a lot here at the channel. And of course, let me know in the comments what you think of Tar Taargadth. I've mentioned it here and there, but we're diving deep today. Let's go. History awaits. Arriving in Golarion once more, we can learn of this ancient empire. And as I've said, I perhaps discussed this empire before. Now, these are the 3 books I would recommend if you're diving into it personally. Of course, campaign settings and Lost Kingdoms do give some information, but hey, what's that over there? Highhelm? The book based on one of the surviving Sky Citadels, one of the successor nations, almost might I say, of Tar Taargadth? Highhelm? Yeah, that's down there. That's a good book to get an idea about it, because there's a legacy left over here. And of course, I have talked a little bit about this in things like talking about the Five Kings Mountains, talking about dwarfs. I've kind of hit on it, but we're going to kind of come together and bring all that information together, and let's begin. So, Tar Taargadth is a dwarven empire, or it was. It was the center of dwarven culture that lasts for over 6,000 years, about 6,500 years of grand power that united the dwarfs through much of Golarion's history. It is only about 3,000 years ago that it ended. So yeah, it's a long time for it to be gone by this point in time. But even then, many of the places and many cities are now left over from that empire. While the empire fell, unlike many other cities, not all the great cities of Tar Taargadth are gone. We do have to look, though, where it came from. Where did it begin? Well, the part that we know about that is before the dwarfs were on the surface, it existed. Effectively, we can talk about the history of the empire, but we have to talk about the origin of the empire a little bit. It began during the quest for the sky, the dwarfs' migration from the Darklands to the surface. The great general Tarik, in negative 5133 AR, basically united the remaining people of the dwarfs. Basically, on this journey they were to the surface, things were falling apart. There were arguments, there were infighting, and Targaryk was like, no, I am king, you are under me. Come forth, I will unite us in one drive. And it worked. It did still take another 150 years to leave the Darklands, but they did. They managed. And in negative 4987 AR, the dwarfs came to the surface, and this fledgling nation under the great High King began in proper fashion. So, Targaryk, the High King, now he had his people on the surface. He could build his people's empire. Still, their enemies came with them. And as thousands of years, they spread throughout Avastian, Garund, across much of the nations and continents around the world, finding places that were outside it, forming the great Sky Citadels, bastions in their war against orcs and goblinoid enemies that they were out there, or other enemies that were around them, building up a powerful empire that wasn't just land. They didn't claim much territory. They were a mountain people, so there were mountains spread out. Their influence was across the world, while their territory was in fact incredibly small. They're using the near surface of the Darklands to travel between those to prevent the far depths of the Darklands. They're not going down deep anymore, but between these like surface tunnels and that you could kind of travel through. Narvoth using that to travel where they didn't have to go as deep and go between these various places, or traveling in various other ways across the surface. They spread. And they grew in strength. Eventually, though, their power waned. That infighting that was there, High Kings couldn't keep it anymore. It began to fall apart. And eventually, they were overwhelmed by the very enemies they had created in their advent. The various goblinoids, the orcs. The orcs who had been an ancient enemy of theirs since their time in the Darklands, in ways both created from them and created against them. Continue to fight against them. And then finally, 1551 AR. 6,500 years later, things fell. The Sky Citadels were then overwhelmed by enemies so efficiently that basically they were either isolated completely from each other, or some fell. And the singular cities and Sky Citadels and places where these dwarfs were, those that survived, no longer saw them part of a great empire. They were their own bastions. They reverted to, honestly, city-states. And that is where most of these exist today. Those remaining bastions are just hollow shells of what once were. The great power that once existed of Tar Taargadth, gone. The heart of the empire, the Five Kings Mountain, it's still there. And they are in this small area, loosely confederated together. You can go see my video on the Five Kings Mountains, but these are still like city-states that kind of get along. It's the closest thing to a remake of the Great Empire as it was. But you have to remember, the Great Empire was across multiple continents. This is one small territory with a bunch of city-states that kind of work together under High Helm. It's a collection of independent city-states that, still being in close proximity, work together. That's what's left. Let's talk about the Sky Citadels. Here's High Helm, a depiction of it from its book. So the fact is, we know for sure there were 10 Sky Citadels that were created during the height of their power, over the course of that time period that it exists. Of those, there are those that survive, but few of them survive intact. And even though there are some that have fallen that have gone and no longer held by the dwarves. So, yes, there are some that are gone, some that are completely ruins, others that just have lost a lot of their power and strength and have a lot less of their territory. Very few are like, well, High Helm. High Helm, the former capital, has remained a great metropolis. One of the few to remain at the strength, at perhaps close to the height it was in the Great Empire. So, yeah. Those still active and inhabited by dwarfs, there are still a number of. I will talk loosely about them, but I think I'm not going to go too into depth about all the Sky Citadels, because some of these being their own city-states, I'll talk about them on their own in their own episodes. Cloud Spires, located in the Terwa Uplands and the Mwangi Expanse, is an important one because of their connections with that region and things like the Shackles. Donganhold in Alkenstar, though now it is highly aligned with Alkenstar City and technically be considered part of that entire kingdom, it is in a way still its own place. It's sealed off its Darkland access completely, though, so they can't even enter it at all. Of course, High Helm still remains in the Five King Mountains, the center of Dwarven culture, as you can kind of see it. Janderhoof in Varisia's Mindstead Mountains still remains. Jormungand, located in the Wolf's Crags, basically in the world wound of Frostmere. It fell to Hyungar incursion long ago, their cousins that remained in the Darklands, and though more recently, it has technically been liberated to a degree. Basically, adventurers came in there and kicked out a lot of the Hyungars and have basically begun reclaiming Jormungand. So it actually has been one that fell, that's been recently reclaimed. But again, it's been in someone else's hands. It's been probably ruined. It still had a lot of its like old guardians traps left on, other than the people that had taken it over. So it's coming back. Kragodon is located in Nirthmas, and of course, Krakovenkus is located in the World's Edge Mountains in Taldor. These 6/7, because one's kind of recently come back, are the remaining Sky Citadels that have dwarfs. And as I said, many of them aren't fully operational or fully controlled or have all of their territory. There are some that have lost sections of their great cities that they once were. some that maybe are withdrawn. They don't have the same populations. They aren't high home. There are 3 that we know were completely lost, though. Helderdan, in the realm of the Mammoth Lords, is behind a glacier, and it's reputed to be cursed and haunted by ghosts of the former dwarves that lived there. Koldakar and the Hold of Belkazin, well, it's still technically there, but the orcs have it. Basically, it fell in the Battle of 9 Stones, and now is Urgur, the capital of the Hold, is a former sky citadel. And Tol Darkar, located the sunken island off the coast of Rahadu. Basically, something happened, and it fell during the entire stuff, and some of their research, they were doing magical-based research, some of those relics still wash up. Now, there are rumors of other maybe sky citadels, but I would consider them maybe secondary sky citadels. What do I mean by that? Dwarven people consider 10 sky citadels in their culture, but there have been claims of others that maybe existed. I would assume basically they were perhaps ones that were coming into existence, or were being built, or were things that were akin to a sky citadel but hadn't quite reached it. Sky citadels were fortress cities, basically, fortress metropolises, made to be both a military outpost and a great city at the same time. They were decorated with huge faces of great dwarves and great depictions of events in the quest for the sky. These were master craftsmen. They were fortified cities. They were engineering feats. So I could see the others being in the process of being built, or partially built, or smaller places that kind of matched it. So with Spiro Sparrow and the Mwangi Expanse and the Shattered Range being a possible one, maybe. But also there's things that like predate it possibly to a time before dwarves normally emerged on the surface. I could also say perhaps there were dwarves that came in front of them. It's not really been explored outside of the Lost Kingdoms in Heart of the Jungle book. So I don't know if Golarian's gonna, or if Paizo's gonna develop that one. The rulers were the High Kings. And of course, we can't turn away from General Tarek. He's the most well-known of the High Kings of the Empire. But currently, when we talk about it at this point in time, there really isn't a High King in there. Yeah. There kind of is. The High King of Highhelm still exists. There currently is one, High King Borgum of the Hill. So, that's the king of Five Kings Mountains, the head of the council that rules over that. So, we might be able to kind of say there is sort of an unbroken line of High Kings after Targic, but again, it's really hard to tell. He does theoretically have maybe some relatives left over. Some of them might be actually Hingars that stayed behind. So it's really kind of difficult to say. But the High King basically ruled and had power and died deep into Tar Taargadth. He lived 600 years. He was only about 160 when he made the Empire. Yeah, 150, 160 in that region. So he had a good 450-ish years of life and building the Empire out of its 6,500 year reign. So there was another 6,000 years after him, but he created a huge legacy. It is a huge thing that he has developed, and he basically shaped the Empire. He had powerful armor that was adamantine, a rare sky metal that he used in his Great Boar. He did leave it behind, but still. Sky Kings were the source of it, and unfortunately, I feel like Targic was a good start, but their strength, the Great Kings, they fell to obscurity, they fell in strength, they eventually didn't prevent that infighting didn't... Again, the overwhelming of enemies with infighting, they still remain, in a way, but it's just... it's not the same. Borogrim still rules. He still would be considered the current High King from Highhelm. That's kind of where we talk about. Highhelm is probably the closest thing to a true legacy of the Empire that's left. It's remained a powerful metropolis, a center of dwarven culture. But even then, it's a shadow of its former self in many ways. Perhaps the kingdom still has a massive population. Does it match what it once had? I can't say for sure. At its height? Maybe not. The great kingdoms, the great powers, the great empire fell. All these city-states that were formed out of especially the Sky Citadels still have some strength, still have that culture, but they've all developed in different directions and all became something a little different. The Empire, the great seat of dwarven power, is gone. You're not going to deny that. But there's so much left over from it in its people and its great cities. And I think that's something to respect about dwarven culture, that they've managed to hold on to something even when they turn from each other. That's it. That's the kind of story of Tar Taargadth. And yes, it deeply links in with the dwarven people. It deeply links in with Highhelm and the Five Kings Mountains, which I've all talked about. But you really have to respect that it is more than just those. Dwarven people are the core of it. Yes, their journey, their strength that they oftentimes had, and again, many of the mistakes and powerful good ideas they've had mixed together. Now, many city-states, many Sky Citadels remain, and these dwarven neighbors can be great neighbors to many places. But dwarfs are across Avastian, Grunt, and far beyond. They've spread, and they're great Sky Citadels in many ways. Most of them still remain. Yeah, a seventh one has been reclaimed, but if you think about that, the 10 great Sky Citadels, only 3 are completely gone. And of those, only 1 is in a condition, well, I think the sunken one probably is in a condition it's really hard to get back, but probably not impossible. The ghost ice one, probably difficult. The one that's owned by orcs, I think that's the one you're probably not getting back, since they're forming more and more into a nation because they hate the Whispering Tyrant more than they hate dwarfs. Again, bad relations between the two species. But yeah, so much both remains and doesn't. That strength of uniting together is gone. The time of the great High Kings, the time of the peak of dwarven culture, is gone. But it doesn't mean that fire is gone and things can't continue to develop, can't begin to be strong, and it couldn't mean that they couldn't find a way to research. Five King Mountains, though separate, could become more of a nation once again. They do. They could reach out to those other Sky Citadels, connect them together, spiritually at least. Kind of like how, in the Elves' Return, they did the same to all their cousins, or have been trying to. Same kind of way. Connect together, find your relatives, reach out to them. It just requires maybe a more powerful High King to once again inspire and unite his people. That'll be it for today. I hope you enjoyed. I think this was my kind of culmination of all the dwarven stuff I did, and I've enjoyed kind of telling you the tale. If you want to see more of my stuff, you can always join me live over on Twitch. I record stuff like this. I do live plays that I also record, and Discussing Tabletop, my talk show. All those are at various times during the week. The current one, Fall of Avonswell, for live plays is Wednesdays at 8. Discussing Tabletops every Saturday at 6. But if you can't join me live, you can always join me on YouTube. Hey, if you're on YouTube, do make sure you're subscribed. Check out all that stuff. Check out the current live play, Fall of Avonswell, or older ones. Check out all my older videos. You can check out my one on the Five Kings Mountains, on my one on the ancestry of dwarfs. They're a little older now. It's been a couple of years, but I still feel they do a really good job of telling the tale. Anyway, Check my social medias for updates, and until the next time, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.